This week on the Eldritch Lorecast.
Travis Willingham mentioned that there is a Critical Role video game.
And I use them when I'm running a bus.
A bus?
Sigil has had a bumpy release.
A bit of Draw Steel Codex.
Companion Quest is currently at Kickstarter.
Hey.
All that and more right now.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Eldritch Lorecast, the #1 tabletop RPG podcast in all the realms. That's right, this is where you come if you want to warm up your theatre vocals before you start your session of D&D or whatever tabletop RPG takes your fancy. If this is the first time you've listened to the Lorecast, then maybe listen a couple minutes, then decide whether you want to give us thumbs up, likes, stars, whatever the podcast platform you're listening to this on desires. I'm Ben Byrne, by the way, and I am joined, as always, by Shawn Merwin, James Hake, Dael Kingsmill. And Dael, I have to ask, dice. What is your dice situation?
I have many a dice set, even. I do want to eat the forbidden gemstones.
Okay.
I like them a lot. I used to be really particular about keeping track of all of my dice sets. And then I think it just took, once you have too many dice trays or too many things, or you're, making up you're like playtesting a class, you're designing it, your computer desk, but you've got this stuff in your D&D bag that you're running like once everything gets split up a little bit and you lose one die, it's all out the window. It's all out the window. The other day I found a D4 in a backpack I haven't used in like 5 years. So, they'll turn up.
So you're more of the dice goblin kind of hoarder, like wherever they are, may they, I'll grab the dice that I need in the moment.
Yeah,
like
it's
the
not
ones
who
that
I
are right in
wanted
front
to
of me.
be, but it was the life chosen for me.
Yeah, sure. Okay, fair enough. Shawn Merwin, what about yourself?
I did back in the day. I have dice older than all y'all.
Yeah,
and,
but that's true.
and they're pretty miserable looking, and I like them. I get free dice from going to conventions and running games a lot, so I rarely buy dice. The few sets I did buy, they would be stolen or accidentally taken away from the table as you're running, 8 games over a weekend. So I bought the ugliest dice I could find. They're these just white, sort of ivory bone looking dice that no one would ever want. And surprisingly, or not surprisingly, they rarely get taken. I had to buy an extra 6-sider and an extra 8-sider that had wandered away at some point, just at the last convention I was at, to make 4 sets. So I would always have 4 of any die I might need. And that's about it. I'm not a big collector. I'm not into shiny things. So I'd go back to using, drawing paper out of a hat numbered 1 to 20 if it came to that, because by God, I love role-playing games. So, hey, if dice are there, then I will use dice.
Yeah, I'm kind of similar in terms of not being a big collector. I mean, I do have my 4 sets of D20s that have the red set, the main D20 that I roll. When I say 4 sets of D20, I mean 4 sets of role-playing dices in D10, D60, or whatever. The red set are my favorite set. I've had them since the first session I ever GM'd. They are my Jedi lightsaber of dice set, like the handy, trusty weapon of choice, so to speak, when I'm playing against a D&D party. Other than that, I have no sentimentality for role-playing dice. I do not get character dice. I don't really care all that much about the metal dice or whatever, except, weirdly, that changes when I'm wargaming. Then I want the faction dice of the specific faction that I'm playing for, I don't know, extra juice, so to speak. But maybe that's because that's more competitive. James Hake, what about yourself?
No, Ben, I want to talk about you a little more. I have a hunch that these faction dice, the role-playing game characters kind of come and go, and you GM a lot. So I have a hunch your RPG characters rarely last for more than a couple of sessions. They're mostly one-shots or something like that, right?
Yes.
Meanwhile, your wargame armies are something you got to paint minis, you got to put all this effort into. Of course you'd want a dice set to represent that level of investment.
We've cracked it.
Yeah.
We've cracked
You're
the code.
getting psychoanalyzed right now.
Yeah,
because I'm just the exact same way. I often GM and I don't buy a dice set for a campaign. I've got a huge thing of dice hanging around. Every now now and then I'll get a cool set of dice at, for a Christmas or birthday. Like I got this great set of dice for Christmas they're like black and they have this, sharp sort of, game science style angle on them, but they have this really like finely detailed hand painted like cherry blossoms on them. They're just like, they're a work of art. And so, I got them as a gift. I want to use them, but I've got more Chessex dice than I know what to do with. So I might as well make a character around dice I already own.
It's funny though, because I think the closest I have to a sentimental set of dice is probably, and I've probably mentioned this before, but it's just like an ordinary, like pretty, but, resin set of Chessex purple dice. But I keep them separate from all my other dice, and I use them when I'm running a boss in combat for my players. A boss. Oh. A boss.
I thought this was some Aussie slang I didn't know.
When I'm running a boss in combat. When I'm running a boss baddie in combat, I use this purple set of dice because I always start with a spiel where I'm like, the first time I ever rolled this die, I got a nat 20. Right. Like a little psych tactic.
Yeah. In chat, they're talking about new players and dice, and dice can be a huge draw. Dice are the perfect come here, get some candy for those new players. Oh, here's your very own set of dice, and now you have to come back and play with me for the next 3 years every week because I gifted you these dice.
They do make for a good gift, but when you were talking before, James, it did make me think. This doesn't happen to me very often, probably because most people I play D&D with know my dice personality in quotation marks reasonably well. How often do you all get gifted dice just as a like Christmas party, or it's a birthday from a friend who's an acquaintance, but not like they're not going to go out of their way to splurge or anything?
I don't get
not often.
Gifted dice that often. Yeah, that's interesting now that I think about it. I get gifted lots of like random other sort of accessory things.
Dice to me, like, sorry, I'm trying to balance them all in my hand. I've got a little bag and it's jam packed full of dice. I'm trying to find room so I can find one die in particular. The dice that are special to me are ones that like came from a certain con or from a certain place. Back when Critical Role was at sort of peak popularity, critical mass of Critical Role, and like, end of campaign 1, start of campaign 2. People who were like dice makers, I met them at Gen Con when the first Tal'Dorei guide was coming out. They would be like, take my Gilmore's Glorious Goods themed die that has like the Gilmore's unicorn logo on it. Or, oh my God, they're all over the place. They're everywhere.
Dice can be like glitter, right? Like Dael finding it in a random bag.
Yeah.
I gave my wife a metal set of dice that it wasn't really a gift. It's just that she doesn't care about dice. So I was like, well, you keep losing your own sets of dice. Here's a set of metal dice that I got gifted. You can use these. She was like, oh, I love these. These are pretty. These are wonderful. Then they spilled out of her bag into the boot of her car, scattered around the back of her car. And I wasn't allowed to take them out because then she considered them lucky just rolling around in the boot of her car. And I think they're still there. Every now and again, we'll pull one out of a grocery bag and be like, what the hell?
That's so charming.
They're also great for self-defense, those metal dice.
True.
Caltrops, go.
Can you see this? A fan of Critical Role gave this to me at Gen Con 50 when the original Tal'Dorei guide came out. And, it's a unicorn to anyone, but it's the Gilmore's Glorious Goods unicorn.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
That's a good one.
Well, speaking of dice, brushing up on a little bit of news from last week, because it was a lighter news week this week, which is nice because it's a little less intense than last week was. Anyway, Hero Forge have launched a Kickstarter introducing custom dice to something that they are going to provide through their digital platform that can then be purchased and printed. These are clear dice sets that can be filled with props, weapons, familiars, or even custom character D20s where you can put the bust of your miniature that you designed through Hero Forge into the dice. They have 2 sizes of D20, a sort of standard size and an extra large size. And I think if your character is small enough, you can actually fit a whole character inside the extra large D20. Apparently, there's no balance issues whatsoever. All the dice have been tested. Which is, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Mainly because you can like adjust where inside the dice the prop that you're embedding in it is, right? Like it's not just in
That's
the
really
center.
funny.
It's, move it around wherever you want. Does this appeal to anybody in light of the conversation we've just had?
It's really cute.
I think that unbalanced dice are really they're not weighted. You know what I mean? So it's like I highly doubt that they are properly balanced, especially because people are they're meant to be printed on demand, and so you can't make that clear. Anyway, but having said that, I don't think it is going to be unbalanced to a degree that matters, and I'm not someone who cares about that stuff. So it's like, yeah, go hard. Hell yeah.
Fair
Roll
enough.
that little halfling around.
Yeah, that's what I've got in my head as well, is just my character having a bad time getting rolled around, or the familiar, The one way this kind of got me, though, was the idea of like putting props associated with a specific character into your dice. I think one of the examples they use is like TNT, a little dynamite stick. If you're playing like, I don't know, an artificer or some kind of rogue or something, if you're playing, let's say, a monster hunter, or if you're playing a ranger, you could put arrows into the D8s or the D6s, whatever. That could be a fun idea. As soon as you upgrade your weapon and you have to roll different dice, it stops being a fun idea. But before then, when you create the character...
How often are you as a ranger upgrading your weapon to be not a bow anymore? Just out of curiosity.
I think it's a good point, but it's also kind of where basically you tempt fate. I think it's tempting fate. I'm going to use that term, because invariably, as soon as you go to Hero Forge, you craft a miniature, you get it posted to yourself, you paint that miniature, the character dies.
I love that you think most people are painting their miniature, but go on.
Yeah, that's the whole reason why Hero Forge lets you color the miniature in app now, Which,
by the way, Michael in chat did point out that the weight distribution wouldn't change if the things inside the dice are made of the same material as the stuff around it.
Yeah, I would have to double check the Kickstarter page to know that for sure.
Now that's interesting. If it's made of the same stuff, how could you tell what's in it?
I don't know, because Ben, you said that they get printed, right? Like same as Hero Forge style.
That's my impression. Again, you'd have to check the Kickstarter page, but from the look of these things, I'm going to say honestly, it looks like they print the prop.
Oh, and then put it in,
and then they encase it
resin.
like in a dice mold resin.
I was gonna say, how do you 3D print? Okay, Scarlet Moth is saying 3D printed resin, but then, but would the I just don't. This is a genuine question. How does 3D printing result in a see-through thing such that you can see the other stuff? It just feels
clear
like
resin,
that.
I guess,
but it just seems to me like that process would, because it's such a stringy process, is the thing, and stringy process often,
not necessarily
often ends up with clear thing being white thing.
I love this business model, though. Really, folks. Your thing is inside there. You can't see it, but trust us.
Yeah, that's going to be my business.
There. That'll be $50. I love it.
We're going to get a lot of comments on this because
there's so many people who are going to know way more about this.
Actually,
yeah,
so
but my understanding of 3D printing is what you're thinking of, Dael, is I don't know the terms, but an older version of 3D printing, or at least an alternate, where they're kind of layering it up, they're building it up in layers.
Yeah.
The way a lot of modern 3D printers work is this is my impression, is that it's kind of like the resin is a goo and the printer kind of reaches down and pulls the shape up out of the goo and like flashes it with UV light in layers to kind of harden it as it's pulling it up. I believe that's how, kind of like a very, very layman's explanation of how it works.
That's cool.
Somebody
I just love for the first time in history we heard the term modern 3D printers.
Yeah, I love this.
As opposed to those, from the 1800s.
Exactly as
Lord and Lady Mills in chat is saying resin versus filament.
Yes,
that
correct.
makes sense. Pat's in chat said PLA versus SLA, but I think it's much funnier to read that as PLA versus SLA. Okay, so that's great. That's making things make much more sense to me. Okay.
Yeah, so filament is the kind of, they spool it out like ice cream, and resin is they kind of flash it with UV light as it's being pulled up.
Do you then still have to, like, is each color going to have to be its own, like, part of the process? Like, you used to have to have the different spools of different colors, right? Hit me up, chat. I'm now fascinated by what's happening.
I wouldn't know how they would create the the color. Hero Forge miniatures, when you pre-order them in color, or order them in color, I suppose, not pre-order, we did a whole party that way, and they look all right, but there is definitely a sort of pastel-y, faded quality to them that I'm not sure whether they're using colored resin or whether they're kind of staining the resin after the fact. Is hard for me to tell. Somebody might know. The color printing is apparently a patented secret from Hero Forge. So there you go, says Scarlet Moth. But yeah, I don't know. That's cool. If you like dice, go check out the Kickstarter, I suppose. They are expensive, though. The price is a little exy, starting at $39 USD for a single D20, and a full set of RPG dice are going to set you back $200 US or $199. So
luxury business, folks.
Yeah.
To be fair, people are paying that kind of money for fancy dice.
Oh, yeah.
That's
every day. It's a thing for a lot of people. And then, I mean, maybe if you're a person who really wants yours to be hyper customized to your character, maybe that's worth it.
Exactly.
It is not for me to decide.
Would I want a solid copper D20 that would go thunk satisfyingly on my table when I roll it? Or do I want it with, my personal halfling inside? I think the hamster ball D20 is so charming. I would shell out $60 for it.
What's
maybe only
spell?
once, but
Otterluke's
Resilient Sphere.
Resilient Sphere. That's what I'm imagining.
Well, speaking of things that are resilient, Critical Role's brand is pretty resilient and has lasted 10 years now. And recently they did an interview, I believe this was for Business Insider. I was going to say something different, but then I read my notes. It was a Business Insider interview talking about celebrating their 10th year anniversary, which is this year. The main interesting tidbit being that Travis Willingham mentioned that there is a Critical Role video game on the way. I believe they teased this last year, and an announcement could be made any day now, because there is no word on, as far as I'm aware, who's developing it, what platforms it will be on, what kind of game it is, except that Travis recently said in that interview, quote, they'll actually be getting their hands, sorry to interrupt my own quote, they being the player, they'll actually be getting their hands on the stick and controlling the outcome of the story, changing what might be possible from not just some of their favorite characters, but new offerings in the world of Exandria. Everybody get on your speculation cap. What do we hope this game would be?
If they're talking about changing the fates of some of their favorite characters, it's got to be something in the modern age of Exandria. We're not going all the way back to the Calamity or the Divergence, as recently explored in Exandria Unlimited with Brendan Lee Mulligan and company. So it's probably going to be set in the era of Campaign 1 or 2 or 3, or maybe after 3, who's to say, where all of the main campaign PCs are alive. It would be really cool to see something following Campaign 3. It's kind of what I'm thinking.
See, the way I think of it, there are two main types of video game that come to mind as being a good fit for a setting like this, where there's a lot of world building and there's characters that people love, right? The first option that I've mentioned before is just a straight up fighting game. It's just Tekken, but it's Critical Role. I think that's probably the less popular of the options, but I think it would work. The other option is the much more expensive and is sort of a high investment option, which would be some kind of an RPG where you make your character and you go around the world that has been built and you can visit these places that you're familiar with. And then you get to occasionally, you meet one of the NPCs or PCs that you're familiar with. And that's a very exciting moment because it matches the thrill that you're looking for. It matches the thrill of Campaign 2, Campaign 3, when you meet one of the characters from a previous campaign and you get that excitement of, I know who this is. If you happen to go into a Magic store and it's run by Gilmore, that's a very exciting thing. It's just that RPGs are a lot to make.
Well, this is the thing. I'm more fascinated. I don't give a crap about the story. I'm going to be honest. I'm just not that much of a Critical Role fan. What fascinates me is what sort of game this is going to be, because I think everybody's default thought is Delport Brecklin just said in chat, Larian Studios, it'd be great to develop it. Yeah, they probably would be. I think Larian have said they've gone back to their own IP. I don't know that for a fact. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but we know
that Swen over at Larian has written the first draft of a new game, is basically what we know from Larian. And I reckon it's going to be one of their own IP.
Sure, yeah. Because for it to be an RPG on the scale of like, forget Baldur's Gate, like think of any kind of smaller scale RPG that's come out in the last little while, they would have had to have been working on this for years unless it is years away from now, right? I could see a scenario, I don't think it would be Larian exactly as you just said, James. I could see a scenario where maybe they come out and they say, yes, we're going to be developing this full-scale Baldur's Gatean RPG and it's going to go into early access either late this year or early next year, but the full release is like 2027 or something. But I could also see, as somebody else said in chat, them coming out and being like, yeah, it's a card game and like you decide... It's for mobile, and like you decide the fate of Exandria by playing your favorite characters in Gwent style cards or something.
This is kind of what I mean, though, right? It's like I think that there is a tricky situation at hand where I think the kind of game that they would be able to make and make well is not necessarily the kind of game that people are going to want or expect. I think the game that would work best would be an RPG. Not even in the style of Baldur's Gate, even Skyrim, which. Let's not pretend that that's not massive. You know what I mean? It's just older. But, I think that something more akin to a sort of linear adventure story game where it's like, you're in a fantasy world and this is the story that you play out. You play as this person is much more within the realms of possibility, but I think would potentially be a little bit less successful.
I would limit expectations even within that because, maybe this is not what you're thinking, but I started thinking like an adventure game like God of War, which is not an open world RPG, but even they take years to create like a game of that scale.
More in the realm of, Banner Saga, which they did have some connection with in the past.
I could see that.
You know what I mean? Yeah. Which could work really well. I'm going to eat my words, but I don't know. All I'm saying is I think the best version of a Critical Role game is one that is very unlikely to be the game that we get. So I'm just going to have to wait and see what they do.
I think the interesting position that Critical Role is in right now is they dominate discourse, but they're not that big of a company. Their resources are not even half on the level of something like Wizards of the Coast. Getting Larian to adapt their brand. And Larian's an indie studio too. Let's not get it twisted. They just happen to have a lot of really good backing and a lot of really, really talented and experienced staff on their team. So Critical Role's in a somewhat awkward position of needing to present a game that will live up to the level of like fame and prestige they have within the space, while also working within the resources they have as being in that spot of quote unquote second fiddle to D&D, which I think that presents a bit of a quality gap in between people's expectations and what's doable.
I think in the RPG space, definitely. I think outside of the RPG space, nobody's heard of Critical Role. You know what I mean?
But I will say the thing that they do have going for them is that because they come from video games, you know what I mean? Like they, as in the behind the scenes they're working with, and not just in the capacity of doing voices, like even the tiny bits of crossover, like Liam having voice directed video games, means that they have more of a chance of knowing not necessarily the big dogs, but the talented dogs in video games. It's like they have more of a chance of knowing the people who are within their range of availability, but very capable. So I don't think they're going to come out with something crap. I'll put it that way.
No, certainly not. Yeah, you raise a really good point here, Dale. When people hear the voices of Matt Mercer, Liam O'Brien, Laura Bailey, Ashley Johnson in Last of Us, I mean, people's expectations for the quality is the wrong word. The AAA-ness, I guess. That's a terrible phrase. The AAA, like, polish of that kind of game, their expectations are AAA. They're not, AA doesn't indicate poor quality, but it indicates, maybe a lower level of resource. I think either way, people might have to expect the unexpected on this one.
Hades.
Love Hades. Love Supergiant.
Supergiant.
That kind of level. Sorry, I'm just still thinking of games where I'm like thinking of things that indie studios are capable of putting out. I think that's where I'm pitting my expectations.
Yeah, but Hades itself, a couple of things. Hades was an incredibly mechanics-driven game with Greek mythology kind of thrown on it as an IP, in quotation marks, they did a very, very unique, very interesting spin on that mythology and kind of almost made it feel like their own IP in a way, their version of Zagreus, of Hades, of those characters. But that game, the way that Supergiant seemed to work is that they develop the mechanics of what they think would be cool and then develop the story, not around, that they're very good at those two things. But I don't think they would be looking at, I don't think Supergiant or a studio like Supergiant would be looking at Daggerheart, for example, and being like, oh yes, we could try to adapt this into a video game. They would be wanting to develop their own mechanics for the game. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is that Hades famously, and Hades 2 now, despite the fact that they don't have the look and polish and money feel behind them of something like a God of War, still took years to develop to the point that Supergiant
to me that seems irrelevant. I feel like they probably have been in development stages for a long time before bringing it up, and they probably will continue to be in development. The idea of it taking years is whatever. It's only when a game takes years that it becomes a thing. And
I disagree that the time scope is irrelevant, because I don't think Critical Role as an IP outside of the RPG industry is necessarily big enough to attract the time, money, and attention from an outside video game company who could be working on anything else.
I think if you're looking at indie enough people, or people who are adjacent to TTRPGs in the kind of games that they want to make, if you're looking at people who are starting up their brand new studio and just need something that is going to make some money to get them onto their next project, I think there's any number of reasons that people would want to work on a game like this.
I mean, look at Pathfinder Kingmaker or Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous. I mean, I think Paizo is very much in the same position as Critical Role is, maybe from a different angle. They're a major but not D&D RPG studio, and they've made a game that it's no Baldur's Gate 3 in terms of its presentation, but it's a classic RPG and it looks pretty good. And it's made by a studio you've never heard of.
So to sum up, we don't know who, what, where, when, why, what it will be, anything about it, but by God, I can't wait.
Yeah.
Man, you always keep us grounded, Shawn. I don't know what we'd do without you.
That's all right. That's why I'm here.
Yeah. I guess, to bring final thesis point is I would be mitigating my expectations. And I think that fans of Critical Role within the RPG industry probably should too. Not expect a Baldur's Gate.
Yeah, I don't think we should expect anything close to what a AAA game is. I think we should be expecting high quality indie game style quality.
Yeah.
And everyone in chat is bringing up that Legends of Vox Machina was very successful on Amazon, even outside of TTRPGs, and that they have a huge budget.
Yeah, $12 million when you start talking about AAA video game development is.
But we aren't talking about AAA video game development, Ben. We're just talking about video games.
No, but that's how much did Hades take to develop? I would guess, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm completely wrong, but I would guess it's more than 12 million. Yeah, anyway. And that's, again, why I'm saying mitigate your expectations, is because I think the expectations of a lot of people within the RPG industry who see Critical Role as secondary only to Wizards of the Coast are imagining that level of video game. I think a lot of people are expecting AAA. Anyway.
I think you're imagining it.
Speaking of video games and expectations not being met, Sigil has had a bumpy release. We talked a little bit about this a few weeks ago when Wizards of the Coast kind of just stealth launched Sigil and were like, yeah, it's here. Woohoo! I haven't had a chance to go in and look at it yet. I'm assuming, but correct me if I'm wrong, none of you have really tooled around in the actual product yet.
Oh man, it's funny. I haven't played a D&D game since last time we talked about it. So
fair enough.
I did a little bit on it, looking at it, and the review that you're about to talk about is not exactly correct, but also not far off.
Well, let's compare thoughts. Sam Makovech from, I believe this was Polygon, has written a relatively detailed, if unfavorable, breakdown of Sigil in its current release state. the too long didn't read kind of version of that review, if you don't want to go check it out, was that it's a nice 3D virtual space to kind of build things in, even if it feels a little bit limited in terms of what you can build, in terms of what environments and pieces are available if you want to kind it to Lego. It's incredibly feature incomplete and requires every player to bring their own gaming PC to be able to really use it in that hands-on way where everybody's moving stuff around.
I think that's so funny because I remember when the idea of this VTT first came up, we were talking about it. I was like, well, Tailspire is really similar and it's really intensive. It'll be interesting to see whether it's accessible to everyone. And after we talked about it for a while, we were all like, no, of course they're going to get it to a point where everyone can access it without a gaming PC.
My laptop is not a gaming PC and I could use it just fine. Now, I did not host full games or anything like that, so I can't speak beyond just the using it to build with. But my really normal, really old laptop did fine.
Were you playing like an actual game in it, Shawn, or were you just kind of tooling around?
I was building with it, monsters, putting dungeons together, that sort of thing.
Now, when you say building monsters,
no, putting in monsters,
okay,
building the dungeons in which those monsters would hang out.
I want to insert one of those memes of someone sitting down to play The Sims with their cup of tea. They sit down with their mug and then the jet engine of their laptop starts. And then
No, I think we're in the exact same territory we were with the previous thing, right? It's what do people expect? What do people want? And I think the failure of Sigil at this point is going to be that it's not something where they tell you how to use it. It's something where they say, here's a tool, use it any way you want. For those people who want to have structure and download adventures and have their friends in and have everything ready for them and want to have it connected to D&D Beyond and have a full featured, ready to go system, that it's not that, and I don't know if it will ever be that. Yes, what Sam said in the review is absolutely true. It is feature incomplete if you expect complete features.
For me, as someone who has the Master Tier subscription on D&D Beyond, largely for work purposes of just being able to go in and, check things or whatever as I need to, but also for personal reasons, it seems like a pretty good deal for this thing to just be like, okay, this is freely accessible to me. I can just go, like, I'm paying for it in theory through my subscription, but I am not paying any more than I was a week ago because I just already have that subscription. I think that's a pretty good deal. Do you, Shawn, think it's worth like upgrading your D&D Beyond subscription or getting a D&D Beyond subscription for the use of Sigil?
If you yourself want to build 3D adventures, then absolutely. If you're players or you are a player who want to have that feel of a video game, a 3D video game, and see everything happening in that 3D space, then it's absolutely worth it. Is it worth it to, goof around with? Maybe. If your goofing money is well spent, then you absolutely. For me, it's not. I will go use it to waste an hour here and there, like I have an hour to waste. But I don't see myself ever using it for the purpose for which people think it has been made. And maybe Wizards thinks that it's made for this reason. Maybe they don't know if it's been made for this reason anymore. I don't know, because all I have is what they presented, which is feature incomplete based on the previous thoughts about what it might be.
Does it feel like a complete product in any way? Like, we've said feature incomplete a few times. A couple of folks have said, online or otherwise, I think Sam says this in the review, that if they had put the tag beta or alpha or early access or something on it to kind of indicate like, hey, we're kind of throwing this out in quotation marks for free if you already have the subscription. It is an early access product. Does that make it better? Or
it's odd because I remember reporting over a year ago where people went to, I think, PAX Unplugged and were shown the version of it that was out then. And even people who are often critical of Wizards in every way came back and said, I wanted to hate it, but it was really cool.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know what the difference is between what they saw and what we see now. I don't know if the changing expectations are behind this. And again, this is one person's thought, and we're all taking their word for it because they put it onto a website, so therefore it must be true.
It's on the internet. You think people would go on the internet and lie, Shawn?
I can't believe it would happen, and not even lie, right? Just give their own opinion of what they've seen, and we can all go look and give an opinion of what we've seen or not.
Fair enough. Well, Sigil is up for folks who want to go and check it out.
I want to jump in and talk about a different VTT just for a second, because I played a bit of Draw Steel earlier, just on Saturday, using their beta virtual tabletop codex. It was pretty cool. I mean, talk about feature incomplete, but this one at least is a beta. It's
Sure.
not even publicly listed on Steam. It's only for beta testers with a code, right? They're not trying to present it as something it's not. And it's really cool to see what a virtual tabletop that is coming together looks like, especially when the game, like Draw Steel is highly tactical. Yeah, Pat's in chat says it's not even beta, it's still alpha. Yeah, I mean, it's highly unpolished, but you can see what it's coming together to be. And that's kind of the joy of an alpha release, right? Is I think some of its rough edges are kind of sanded over by what you want it to be, not by the harsh reality of what it is, which is what I think Project Sigil is running into at the moment.
Help me out, James. Is that 3D or 2D?
Yeah, it is not. It is 2D.
2D.
Okay.
It's in that way, quote unquote, less ambitious than Sigil is.
2D in terms of top down, you're observing it in 2D, but there are elements of
Layers.
height.
Right. Yeah. For example, we had a what's the Draw Steel Rogue shadow? We had a shadow that was in a tree using a pole arm, and so was gaining boons on attacks by jabbing down at goblins outside the Delian Tomb from height. And so the mechanics are coded to include this sort of height advantage, right? But the map itself is a fairly accurate description of how you'd be playing a pen and paper on a tabletop.
That's a good way of describing it. Visually 2-dimensional.
Yeah.
Functionally 3-dimensional.
Mm-hmm.
Gives me the inverted image of someone trying to get a cat out of a tree. There's a cat in the tree trying to stop people from getting it out with a pole, just going like, stay away. Yeah, get out of here.
And it's very cool. And it's effective for what it does, right? D&D, I don't think, needs a computer to make it run properly. I don't think Draw Steel necessarily needs a computer to make it run properly, but I think it benefits more than D&D having calculations going underneath the hood.
Is it fairly automated in terms of like I click attack, numbers come out to tell me how much damage I do?
I was not in the director's chair, so I wouldn't say for sure with total certainty, but there was a fair bit of automation, and it sounds like they have quite a bit of automation planned as well, especially for things like resources, because every class has resources, and there's whatever the secondary thing is called. Shoot, I don't remember. There's plenty of resources that moves and effect to generate, and they do automatically calculate and add and subtract as you do stuff.
Do you as the player have any sort of hands-on control, or are you just kind of spectating the VTT itself?
Plenty of hands-on control. Oh yeah, there's cool, there's a hotbar of buttons that affect the different abilities and actions and maneuvers that you have in combat. Yeah, they know what they're doing, is what it seems like to me.
Cool. Well, that is the Codex, I believe it's called, being worked on in the shadows by MC. I don't know. Currently with their early access play testers. Speaking of things that are not in beta and are fully featured, Companion Quest is currently at Kickstarter.
Hey.
Just a quick shout out for Companion Quest. If you're not aware, it's Ghostfire Gaming's newest board game. 1 to 4 player co-op family board game where you collect companions, little D&D familiar-like creatures that will help you complete your quests, watch out for dangers, and catch the mischievous Gugu, who is a little creation by Runesmith, who is a monkey cat goblin thing that can open dimensional portals. This is going to be a little bit of behind the scenes, but I think it's hilarious. Jess, who works in customer support here at Ghostfire, has been making little clips for social media around Companion Quest and made a little video the other day about Gugu and Stibbles, the two characters from Companion Quest, play companion quests with each other using the board game and the plushies that we have of those characters.
Oh, cute.
And she had to cut off one of Gugu's arms to be able to puppeteer it to move some of the pieces around on the board. I'm probably ruining that for a couple of people, but more people will see it on social media than otherwise. So yeah, we've got one 3-armed Gugu now in the office, which I think is very funny. I will throw the link to when I can figure out how to copy the link on a Mac. I will throw it in the chat. It will be up over there if you want to go check out the Kickstarter. It is a great game. And speaking of great things, I thought we were going to get to this a lot earlier, but we didn't. It's time for listener emails. Woohoo! Shawn, what's the email address if people want to send us an email to ask a question?
I'm glad you asked, Ben. I believe it is podcast@ghostfiregaming.com.
Excellent.
I love it when he asks Shawn instead of us, James.
Yeah, makes me feel happy.
One day, Shawn will slip in the Mastering Dungeons email address just for a laugh.
Just for fun.
This question coming in from Gethin, who is asking about low-level legendary monsters. The Monster Manual 2025, I did not corroborate this, but according to Gethin, only the unicorn is a monster below CR10 with legendary actions. Everything else is above CR10. Why are legendary actions only reserved for the highest tiers of play? Should more low CR creatures feature legendary actions? What do we think?
I think absolutely there need to be more legendary creatures at low levels. Straight up, most D&D campaigns don't even get to the legendary creatures. And as much as the name legendary might imply otherwise, it's a game mechanic designed to make solo fights go well. You might as well call it a solo action or a solo resistance. That would better communicate its gameplay purpose. Legendary is a weird little bit of gameplay and lore interaction that I find hamstrings the concept more than it helps it. That is a fully feature complete thought.
Yeah, I guess so.
Go ahead, Shawn.
I'm going to move in the opposite direction just a little bit by saying that we already have bonus actions. We already have reactions. Legendary action is something above and beyond that really should put the characters on their heels. And at those lower levels, especially at the lowest levels, first level, second level, characters can already have a hard enough time and be on their heels with just some bad die rolls. I'm not opposed to using legendary actions with monsters at, CR 6, 7, 8, maybe in that range, where the unicorn is. But even the unicorn is strange because it's a lawful good creature and it's legendary action. It has two. One, it can run around and stab you with its horn. The other is it can protect people. So it's odd that the one that's below CR10, or maybe it's not odd that the one that's below CR10 is one that you probably won't fight. And if you do have a battle, you'll probably be on your side, assuming you're a good creature. And so I would rather see those monsters, especially those boss type monsters at the lower CRs, make more use of bonus actions and reactions rather than stepping into this legendary action thing, which kind of, especially if you have maybe a small group, like only 3 or 4 players, you are getting an action done to you after every action that your party takes. So that might be a little much at sort of lower CRs.
It's tricky because I feel like my brain is coming at this from 2 separate directions, right? Like there's this mechanical implication that comes with legendary as a tag and the idea of legendary actions. But there's something narrative as well, And I think absolutely in low levels, you should be able to have, I need different phrases, but you should be able to have a legendary encounter at early levels. Like I'm on record saying that I think every beginner box should have you encounter a dragon, probably fight a dragon in some capacity. Find a way to let these level 1 characters, brand new players, fight a dragon because that's what they expect from this game. And because that's fun and it's exciting. And I don't mean that it should literally always be, it doesn't have to be a dragon. What I'm talking about is like the idea of legendary narratively is not just this really big thing. It's not just the Tarrasque. It's there are local legends. It can be a big deal if, these are the people who killed the Cyclops who kept raiding our farms. That kind of a deal. I think about Greek mythology. When Heracles was fighting the Hydra, a giant crab was summoned by Hera from the waters of the Lernian Lake to come up and join the battle and also fight Heracles. And he crushed it beneath his foot. And that crab was put into the stars and remembered as the zodiac sign of Cancer. And you look at the art and it's just kind of a big crab. You know what I mean? It's not actually, when we say giant, we just mean it was pretty big for a crab. But that guy's a legendary monster. You know what I mean? And I just think that we need to recognize that the word legendary is more flexible than it feels. And we need to allow for local legends that are because I think if you're a newbie player and you're only ever fighting bandits or goblin groups, it's gonna get stale.
You know, you're making a great point, Dale. And I think legendary in this case means a lot of different things, but one of the things it means is breaking the rules, not like everything else. So in that sense, what legendary means is you don't follow the same rules as the players or as the other monsters. But I think there are better ways to show that than giving it an action, basically an action after every character goes. Which again may be overwhelming at lower levels. There might be an in-between stage.
I've had my issues with legendary actions in general. I just think it's kind of a boring mechanic, but that's
yeah, we've had that.
It has a place, and I don't know if these monsters use it well. It has a place for things that could be very interesting, but not very powerful. Something like a vampire, if they have to use their entire turn to try to do the fun thing that vampires do, which is bite you in the neck and draw your blood. Oh, you have to have it grappled, but you also have to attack. Well, if you can't keep something grappled, then you will never get a chance to do the cool thing. That's where something like a legendary action would be great. The Aboleth uses it. If it's got something grappled, it can then use its, I think it's called consume thoughts or consume memories, something like that. So that shows that it's doing this cool thing. It's not the most powerful thing that it can do, but since it's a two-step process, it can get that second step in. And that's what I would love to see legendary actions become in some way, is let the monster do the cool monster thing without having it being blocked all the time by players pulling themselves out of grapples or whatever they are doing to stop it.
And there's this interesting decision-making mechanically that means that if a monster has legendary actions, it sort of tacitly must also have legendary resistances, which have been a thorn in some players and GM side ever since the Monster Manual came out in 2015. So it's a simple matter of being able to scale these legendary actions properly and these legendary properties properly. I think it would be really cool for a legendary goblin boss that you fight at level 3, 4, or 5 to have one legendary resistance, just zag on him a little bit, be like, oh, you're going to hold person me? Well, I guess you can't do that in 2024, but you know what I mean? You're going to you're going to poison me? Yeah. Well, you're not going to do that at level 4 or 5. You're going to grapple me? No, I think not. I'm going to instantly bust out of it, or even a more limited legendary resistance. But just one sort of special moment, and then you can ramp it up in intensity. Sort of a sliding scale of legendary power that suits the various tiers of the game. Right? Levels 1 through 4, you're supposed to be local heroes anyway. So why not, as Dael said, a local legend?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the other way of thinking about this is the MCDM way of like action-oriented monsters, right? And what legendary actions kind of do is just equal out the action economy so that a monster can potentially solo a party. I don't think legendary actions are necessarily there for the explicit intention of soloing monster fights, but they certainly help with that because they balance out the action economy. I kind of agree with Shawn that I think that the definition of legendary creature, which has legendary actions and, as you pointed out, James, as well, legendary resistances, indicates that this is something that like higher level players should encounter, right? This should change the game. You should set up expectations over the course of 3 or 4 or 10 sessions, however long your campaign is going. And then when you hit a legendary monster, the party's expectations are kind of broken and they're like, oh, wow, we can't we're in trouble here. I remember it doesn't have legendary actions, it's reactions, but I remember the first time my party fought a Hydra, that
And
really
then the crab
shattered their
came up out of the
expectations
water
of
and
the
you
game.
had to stomp on it.
There was no crab, but the Hydra can react with each of its heads. As many heads as it has like a reaction to attack people. And so the introduction of legendary actions is kind of like you've entered a new tier of play. That being said, I do think that legendary actions would be good more in tier, CR like 6, 7, 8 monsters. It would be good to have more of those. I've given legendary actions to werewolves and things like that have that kind of legendary monster vibe to them, but aren't quite godlike. I think at the lowest levels that you were talking about a moment ago, James, in terms of like a goblin boss, there are, and people might not be as satisfied with them, but I think there are some cool mechanics in terms of how you can use actions, reactions, and bonus actions, particularly with boss monsters within a group that can fulfill the legendary action problem of equaling out the action economy without using legendary actions. A lot of stat blocks like goblin bosses can use reactions to like throw other enemies, other like their own allies in front of the party.
Oh yeah.
Captains and things usually have like a bonus action to command a fellow minion to like move and make an attack. Interlocking stat blocks that have interlocking things where like when you fight this group of goblins, if they're all standing next to each other, their armor class goes up by 1 for every goblin that is adjacent to another goblin because they kind of shield wall or whatever. I think there's ways to kind of build that in that isn't necessarily legendary actions for the lower levels. The Stabby Stabber. Isn't that your design, James?
It's my design.
If I'm not mistaken, the Stabby Stabber is a great like low
Great name.
CR goblin to throw at a party that's kind of unexpected.
Yeah. I feel like it's just that legendary creature means a specific thing within the context of this game. And mechanically, I do think that it makes sense to not have them appear at low levels. But because that word outside of the context of these specific mechanics means a slightly different, there's just a dissonance in what the expectation is based on that title that I think is causing the heart of the problem.
I just want to see cool low-level monsters. I don't really care what we call it. And I want to see them published by Wizards of the Coast. I'll use Flea Mortals. I'll use the stuff I designed for Tal'Dorei Reborn. I'll use all of that. But it's not always added to D&D Beyond. Luckily, both of those books were, but D&D, Wizards of the Coast, they're at the top of their game. They're at the top of this industry. I feel like they shouldn't be getting outclassed by third-party publishers. Not to say that third-party publishers are worse. In fact, they're often better because they can fit into a niche better. But I don't think this stuff is niche. MCDM, Critical Role, Ghostfire Gaming. I feel like when it comes to monster design, we're all lapping Wizards of the Coast here, and I just want to see more.
Yeah, I think I agree. I was wondering because legendary actions don't come earlier than 5th edition. They were introduced in 5th edition, if I'm not mistaken. But even if they did a proper like 6th edition, like completely different rule set, I wouldn't be surprised if legendary actions kind of become a legacy thing from 5th edition. You know what I mean? In the way that like Fireball the spell is a legacy thing that has to be in D&D somewhere.
Yeah,
I was thinking about that, Ben, and I agree, and that's not always a good thing. Right. I think we've got a lot of, over the years, things that they thought that their fans would revolt if this wasn't in there. Some things should not be legacy. Some things should be dropped just because they're popular does not mean they should be carried into a new edition. That's all I gotta say.
And with that, we've done it. So that means it is the end of the episode. So we need to wrap this up. If you've enjoyed this episode, you can join us live on Twitch, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 3 p.m. Pacific on a Tuesday. If you're in Australia, it is 9 a.m. on a... Wait, did I say Tuesday a second ago? I'm going to retake that. It is 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 3 p.m. Pacific on a Monday. If you're in Australia, it is 9 a.m. on a Tuesday. And I'll just warn our US compatriots that time is going to change in a couple of weeks to 7 p.m., 4 p.m. once daylight savings ends in Australia. It's going to be dark at 5 o'clock.
No.
Or you can catch us on YouTube or Spotify or wherever you get your podcast. Stars, thumbs, all those things. We crave thumbs. Give us the thumbs. That's the Witcher's Pact that we make on this podcast. So come give us more thumbs next week because we'll be here. I've been Ben Byrne here with Shawn Moe and Dael Kingsmill, James Hake, and we will be back for more thumbs next week with another episode of the Eldritch Lorecast.
More thumbs. More thumbs. More thumbs. More thumbs.
More thumbs.
I'm
sure people were chanting that to us at PAX.